Welcome to the Wife Stories YouTube channel. New video every day, and don't forget to subscribe. Here we go.
The chair where she sat, naked, that image is seared into my mind more vividly than any photograph could capture. It was one of those tall wooden bar stools with a slightly curved back and a footrest that looked like it had been scuffed 100 times by nervous shoes. I remember the hush in the room before I turned the corner, and then the rush of blood to my face when I saw her. Her bare shoulders, her hair falling across them, and that faint gleam of sweat on her collarbone. The hush inside me turned into a roar that only I could hear, but outwardly, my body did something I never expected. I froze in the doorway, silent, watching Emily and the man beside her. His name was Michael. It wasn't the first time I heard of him, but it was the first time I saw him standing so close to her flesh. They didn't notice me at first. The city was alive outside, horns blaring, laughter floating through the open window from a couple stumbling out of a late-night bar. Yet within those walls, inside my chest, a hollow quiet expanded. The hardest part was realizing how easily trust can be turned into a weapon. One moment, you think it shields you. The next, it strikes straight at your most vulnerable spot. There she was on that stool, her body turned toward him, her bare legs slightly parted. Nothing about her posture said guilt. Instead, it radiated a brazen intimacy. This was not a sudden impulse. I could sense a familiarity in the way he cupped the curve of her hip, in the way their breaths mingled like they had done it 1,000 times before. The quiet in me only grew heavier, denser, until it pressed against my ribs. Then I cleared my throat. Emily flinched, as though someone had snapped a twig in a silent forest. She whirled around, hair shifting across her bare shoulders. I will never forget her eyes in that second. They were wide, terrified, but somehow also defiant. Michael's hand fell away from her waist. My gaze flicked from the arch of her spine to his face. His jaw clenched, a flicker of fear and anger dancing in his eyes. But no one spoke. Time seemed to stretch. Outside, a siren wailed, so distant it might have been from another planet. Inside, my world was changing in ways I couldn't yet fathom. Slowly, with a calm I didn't know I possessed, I forced my feet to move until I stood a few steps from them. No shouting, no bursting into accusations. Instead, I studied the two of them, memorizing everything. The flush on her cheeks, the trembling in her fingers, how he shifted from one foot to the other like a trapped predator. I felt as though I was in a movie, watching the final act, except I was the one who should be screaming. Yet I couldn't scream. I could barely breathe. When Emily finally moved, she reached for a discarded blouse on the table nearby. She pressed it to her chest, covering herself in a gesture that was almost modest. Too late, but still. Her eyes flicked to Michael, as though silently begging him to fix the moment. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. I realized I was still standing with my arms at my sides, fists clenched, nails biting into my palms. My voice, when it emerged, was low and cold. "Get dressed," I said to her. She seemed stunned for a second, then nodded. I turned my gaze on Michael and saw his face was set. He had dark hair and the kind of smirk that likely attracted people, but at that moment, it was gone. I remember thinking he looked more like a cornered animal than a suave lover. I repeated, "Get dressed," and he gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, trying to gather what remained of his bravado. Emily slid off the stool, and her bare feet landed softly on the floor. Her body tensed as she stepped away from him, walking behind a low partition to grab some clothes. I stood still, my heart hammering slower than I would have expected. I thought I'd be raging, throwing furniture. Instead, an oppressive quiet had slipped over me like a straitjacket. I'd never realized silence could be such a powerful expression of emotion. I used to believe words or fists were how men expressed rage. I learned in that moment that nothing is louder than a man who has been betrayed but chooses to speak with quiet restraint. She came back fully clothed, eyes darting from me to Michael. I wanted to say, leave, but I didn't know to whom. Maybe I wanted them both gone. Maybe I wanted time to reverse so I could barge in a few seconds earlier, or never leave her alone at all. But time doesn't accommodate regret. Michael adjusted his shirt, set his shoulders, and looked me straight in the eye. I should go, he muttered. Emily didn't protest. That told me enough about their dynamic. She wasn't trying to shield him from my wrath. She wasn't trying to shield me from further pain. She merely stood, arms crossed, a trembling corner to her lip. Michael stepped around me, and I let him pass without a word. A wave of cologne, heady, spiced, foreign, followed him. I knew that scent. I'd smelled it before on Emily's clothes, on her hair, when she would come home late, telling me she was too tired to talk. It clung to her like a secret. Every memory of that smell cut deeper now. The front door opened, then shut. The two of us were alone. Her breathing was ragged, and my stillness made her agitated. She swallowed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice catching like a splinter in her throat. She hugged herself, and I noticed the faintest hint of her figure, pregnant. The thought stabbed at me. I had once thought that child was mine. Now all I could do was question everything. But I said nothing about it. I didn't accuse her. I didn't even spit out her name with bitterness. Instead, I turned on my heel and left. Not out of the apartment, no. I went into the kitchen and began washing the dishes stacked in the sink. My fingers trembled under the flow of warm water, but I kept rinsing, scrubbing, methodically, as if controlling my immediate surroundings could stave off the chaos inside my head. She didn't move. Maybe she expected me to slam a door or punch a wall. We hear those stories. The man who breaks everything when he finds out. But I had no such urge. I was beyond that kind of fury. This was deeper. A betrayal so profound I couldn't express it in any normal way. My silence, I realized, was a weapon in itself. It cut her more than any loud confrontation could have. Eventually, she edged closer. I felt her presence behind me. "Listen," she began. I shut off the faucet and wiped my hands on a towel, taking my time. Each second felt stretched thin. My pulse drummed in my ears, but outwardly I remained steady. "I listened," I said quietly. "Long enough." She stepped away, tears in her eyes. I could see her reflection in the glass window above the sink. Her body shook with sobs, but I offered no comfort. It wasn't cruelty, though it might have looked like it. It was survival. Trust had been my shield, and now it was my blade. In that moment, trusting her again was impossible. And so my trust became a weapon, something I wielded to cut her out of my heart. I left her there, her soft cries echoing, and walked to our bedroom. I didn't bother turning on the light. The city illuminated vague silhouettes through the window. I felt detached, like a ghost drifting through my own home. That night, we didn't speak again. I slept. Well, I closed my eyes. On the couch, listening to the distant hum of traffic. Every time I inhaled, I caught that faint note of Michael's cologne in the air, even if it might have been a memory, not reality. Morning came. The dog, our retriever named Carson, was at my side, tail thumping anxiously. He used to greet Emily enthusiastically, but that week he had started growling at her. Dogs sense change before we do. Maybe he smelled Michael's scent on her clothes, or maybe he sensed the tension that had replaced what used to be warmth. Emily walked by in the hallway, her slippers sliding across the floor. Carson let out a low rumble from deep in his throat, like he barely recognized her. That's how I felt, too. She paused in the doorway, hugging herself again, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Before I could say anything, though I'm not sure I would have, she announced she was going to bed early that night, as though nothing had happened, as though we could skip ahead in the script. I simply nodded. Nodding was safer than speaking. Speaking might shatter the brittle calm. But the next morning, I found her shoes tucked haphazardly near the door. They'd reeked of that same spiced cologne. My gut twisted. Despite her claim of going to bed early, She had gone out. Again, presumably meeting him. My fists clenched until the knuckles turned white. Still, I remained silent. Sometimes a man's quiet is more terrifying than any scream. I confronted her with near politeness. "You were out," I said calmly. "Your shoes smell like someone else." She tried to protest, stammering nonsense about a quick errand, a friend's house, maybe spilled perfume. Her lies were so clumsy I almost pitied her, but pity had no place in me anymore. I looked at her belly, at that slight swell that reminded me of our unborn child, and the question gnawed at me. Whose child was it? Mine, or the man she'd been with on that stool? Instead of demanding an answer, I turned and washed the kitchen floor. Yes, I know. It sounds ridiculous. In the movies, the betrayed husband storms out or shouts accusations, but reality is often far quieter. I wiped each tile, feeling how cold the floor was under my bare feet. It matched the chill creeping through my chest. If trust was a weapon, I had just found out how easily it could be turned on me. I decided I needed proof, not just suspicions. Suspicions can be explained away, dismissed, but evidence, blood, as they say, stands undeniable. So I bought a paternity test. Calmly, politely, like a civilized man. I offered it to her in the living room that evening. She looked at me stunned. Her tears brimmed again. For a moment, I saw panic in her eyes. She tried to refuse, but I repeated my request in a quiet, unwavering tone. She nodded, swallowing hard. The result came a week later. By that time, we had barely spoken, existing in a fragile ceasefire. She'd avoid me. I'd avoid her. Neither of us wanted to break the surface tension, but once the envelope arrived, there was no turning back. I opened it alone in the bathroom. The stale smell of damp tiles and old soap filling my nostrils as I read the words. Not mine. My breath caught in my throat. I remember gripping the sink so hard my fingertips grew numb. The child she carried wasn't mine, and somehow, in that moment, I still cared about her safety. I should have hated her, but I couldn't muster hatred, only a deep, soul-crushing disappointment. This was the final blow. The quiet inside me grew into a black hole, devouring what was left of my illusions. I walked out into the living room and found her standing by the window, holding the test results she must have read. She turned to face me, tears streaming down her cheeks. When she tried to approach, I raised a hand, and she froze. My voice was steady but hushed. "I won't scream," I told her. "I won't curse you out. I won't raise a hand to hurt you, but I'm done." She sobbed, covering her face, shoulders shaking like broken wings. Carson paced by my side, occasionally glancing at her as though unsure who she was anymore. She tried to speak, but only sobs came out. Finally, she croaked, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I believed she was sorry. Yet sorrow changes nothing. The betrayal was done. The child was real. My trust shattered. And in that silent meltdown, I found clarity. I wrote a note on a small piece of paper. I made my handwriting neat, each letter carefully curved, each line deliberate. "I am not punishing you," I wrote. "I am healing from you." Then I placed the note on the table and turned to leave. She saw what I'd written. Her eyes widened with fresh tears. I took off my shoes, let my socks slide off. The tile was cold under my bare feet. I recall each step, how it sent small shocks of cold up my legs. Physical pain was a welcome contrast to the emotional numbness. She stood there, trembling and crying, and I simply walked out the door. I left my wallet, my phone, my keys. I left behind almost everything, because in that moment, none of it mattered. I needed to feel every step of my exit, to remember how each footfall stung, to carry the memory of that coldness, so I'd never forget how it felt to have the woman I loved betray me. The city swallowed me in a swirl of lights, horns, and footsteps. People brushed past, too busy with their own nights to notice a man walking barefoot through the damp streets. My mind was ironically calm. The swirl of anger and heartbreak had for now crystallized into a single forward motion. Get away. I don't know how long I walked. Hours, perhaps. I found myself on a deserted block not far from the waterfront. The hiss of distant traffic lingered. My feet hurt, small cuts on the soles, the burn of cold concrete. I sat on a curb, letting the sting anchor me to the present. That's where I realized something. The worst part of betrayal isn't the physical act, but the indifference that seeps in when trust is destroyed. The knowledge that the person you cherished most cared so little for your faith in them that they'd break it without a second thought. That knowledge robs you of your sense of safety. Eventually, I made my way to a hotel, paid for a room in cash with what I had left in my pocket, and collapsed on the bed. Sleep came in fitful waves. I kept replaying that moment. Her on the stool, naked, leaning into Michael's touch. My insides twisted each time the image resurfaced, yet I couldn't banish it. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe I needed to feel that pain in its raw form to ensure I'd never make the mistake of trusting her again. In the morning, I woke with a dull ache in my legs, partly from the hours of walking, partly from the restless half-sleep. The sun crept through the blinds, harsh and unforgiving. I stared at the phone on the bedside table. I didn't want to call or text her. I didn't want anything from her. Instead, I needed to figure out what was next. My mind turned to the fundamental question: where do I go from here? Memories of our life flashed through me. Our wedding day, the time she laughed so hard on a roller coaster she nearly fainted, the nights we'd watch old movies with takeout Chinese. Each memory was a barb, a reminder of what was lost. But I wasn't ready to bury them yet. Burying them would mean burying a part of myself. I spent the next few days in a strange limbo, hiding from calls, ignoring texts. At work, I called in sick. The manager, a friend of mine, offered sympathy without prying for details. Each morning, I'd wake to that dull, familiar ache in my chest. Each night, I'd lie in the hotel bed, listening to the traffic outside. The city's noise had never felt more comforting. It drowned out the swirling emptiness inside me. On the third day, I went back to the apartment. Not because I missed her, but because I needed to pick up some clothes, paperwork, and a few essential items. I wanted to slip in and out, hopefully while she wasn't there. Yet when I turned the key in the door, the spare from the hallway closet that she must not have realized still existed, I found her standing in the living room, wearing a sweater and leggings, tears already shining in her eyes. She started to talk, her voice trembling. I tried calling. I held up a hand. "I'm only here for my things." She watched me walk to the bedroom. Carson was nowhere to be seen. I suspected she had boarded him somewhere, or maybe he was with a friend. I dreaded the idea that she might have given him away. Still, I tried not to dwell on it. I couldn't handle more heartbreak right then. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and stuffed in clothes haphazardly. She came to the doorway, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm worried about you." It almost made me laugh. An ugly, bitter laugh. She was worried about me now. My silence was thick as I continued packing. Finally, I turned and faced her. "You don't have to worry. I'm still in one piece." She reached out a trembling hand toward me, as if to touch my arm. I stepped back. The rejection made her flinch. "This wasn't how it was supposed to happen," she said, voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I lost control." A wave of cold fury washed over me. But I remained outwardly calm, even though my pulse thudded like a drum. "Yes, you lost control," I said quietly. "But the problem is, now you've lost me." I zipped the bag with a sharp tug. She started sobbing, big watery gasps that rattled her. She was pregnant and emotionally distraught, but I couldn't muster pity, not in that moment. My compassion was spent. I stepped past her, my bag in hand, and paused in the living room, glancing at the spot on the table where I'd left my note. It was gone. "I kept your note," she said between sobs. I read it over and over. I nodded. "Good. I didn't say more, but I think she understood. I meant, good. Let it remind you every day that I'm not coming back. Let it remind you that sometimes trust is the most dangerous weapon we wield against each other. I walked out, letting the door shut softly behind me. Outside, the sun was brilliant and painful. I stood in the hallway for a moment, waiting for my heart to slow. I had half expected her to chase me or to scream or beg, but she didn't. Maybe she realized words wouldn't fix this. Maybe she already sensed that indifference was the darkest shadow in my heart now. And it would stay that way. Days turned into weeks. I found a small studio apartment that I rented by the month. The place was old and smelled vaguely of mildew, but it had a bed, a kitchenette, and solitude. I immersed myself in work. My phone rang occasionally, my mother, my younger brother, even the boss checking in. I told them all I was fine, just going through a rough patch. No one pried too hard. That's the beauty of being an adult in a big city. People respect your silence. At night, though, the memory of her on that stool refused to go away. I pictured Michael's hand on her hip, the flush in her cheeks. Sometimes I felt nauseated with the thought of it. Other times, I'd feel an odd pang of sadness for the child who might never know its father in a complete family. But that father wasn't me. I found strange comfort in the small routines. Brewing coffee in the morning, jogging along the river in the evenings, letting the crisp air burn my lungs. My bare feet had healed, the blisters and cuts scabbed over. Yet I never forgot the sensation of stepping away from her that night. Then one evening, an old friend invited me to a small get-together, more of a casual dinner than a party. I wasn't eager to go anywhere social, but I forced myself to. I hadn't been out in public since the incident, aside from work. Maybe I needed a dose of normalcy. The house was full of chatter, the smell of barbecue, and an underlying buzz of people who had drunk just enough to be comfortable, but not sloppy. I was standing by the grill, holding a bottle of water, when I spotted her in the far corner. Emily. She was with a couple of mutual acquaintances, talking quietly. She wasn't wearing anything fancy, just jeans and a sweater, but I couldn't help noticing how tired she looked. Pale, subdued, hands pressed protectively against her belly. When she saw me, she froze. A hush seemed to fall around us, as if the world recognized the tension. But the conversation among the rest of the guests continued, unaffected. She whispered my name, but I caught only the shape of her lips. I turned to walk away, but the host, an old friend of ours, stepped forward, trying to smooth the awkward moment. He said, a bit too brightly, "Hey, you two. Been a while since I've seen you in the same place. Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Everything's fine." I lied effortlessly. Emily swallowed. Her eyes glistened, and she nodded. "Yeah," she managed. "We're just complicated right now." Our friend, not wanting to pry, quickly found an excuse to move on. Emily and I stood facing each other, an invisible gulf between us. She opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered, "I'm sorry." Those two words again, so inadequate. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That hush inside me felt suffocating, so I turned and slipped away into the backyard. The backyard was lit by hanging string lights. A few people milled around, talking in hushed tones. I found a quiet spot near the fence. My mind churned with half-formed thoughts, the memory of that betrayal overshadowing everything. I heard footsteps behind me, soft, tentative. She must have followed. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. I don't know what else to say. I remained silent, my eyes locked on the flickering lights overhead. The soft hum of conversation and distant laughter from inside the house clashed with the silence in my chest. It reminded me of that night. The city's noise contrasted by the hush of my heartbreak. She came closer, close enough that I could sense her presence at my side. If I could go back, I would. "I'd undo it," she said haltingly. "But I can't. And now, I'm alone." "You chose that," I managed quietly. Trust is a weapon. You turned it against me. She reached out, her fingers brushing my arm. This time, I didn't step away. I let her touch me, feeling how small and cold her hand was. She whispered, "I know I did." A swell of emotion rose in my throat, threatening to choke me. I fought it back with a deep breath. "You're having his baby." Her breath caught. "Yes," she whispered, "and I understand that closes every door between us. But I still need you to know how sorry I am." I turned to face her. "Don't you understand?" I said, my voice steady but laced with a raw edge. "It's not just about the act. It's that you were indifferent to what it meant for us. You lied. You took my trust, something meant to protect both of us, and you twisted it." She started crying silently, tears gliding down her cheeks. A few onlookers glanced our way, sensing the tension, but nobody approached. We were beyond their help. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I could see her heartbreak, but I had none of my own left to give her. "I can't fix this," I said, stepping back. "And I won't watch you carry his child." Her sobs wrenched from her chest, like something torn out by force. She clapped a hand to her mouth, stifling the sound. My own eyes stung, but I refused to cry. Crying in front of her felt like giving her a chance to see my weaknesses again. Instead, I turned and slipped through the fence's side gate, leaving her to crumble alone under those string lights. I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, the confusion of street lamps and car headlights painting everything in a surreal glow. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't check it. Probably friends from the party, worried about me. Possibly Emily, though she rarely tried to call anymore. The city's pulse was steady, but my own heart hammered with 1,000 conflicting emotions. All I could hear in my head was the echo of my own voice. Trust is a weapon. I eventually found myself at a little tavern, half empty despite it being a Saturday night. I slumped into a booth, ordered a whiskey, then stared at the glass as if it held answers. I downed it in a single swallow, relishing the burn in my throat. It was a lesser pain, one I could manage. There was a TV overhead, playing some local sports channel on mute. People chattered around the bar, but I tuned them out. My phone buzzed again, and this time, on impulse, I glanced at it. It was a text from an old colleague telling me about a marketing event happening downtown. I deleted it without replying. My life had narrowed to this moment of self-imposed exile, and the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. And in that moment, I preferred it that way. Time lurched forward. Another week passed, then another. I sank deeper into my new routines, occasionally catching glimpses of Emily, once at a grocery store, once on the sidewalk across from my office. She never tried to approach, and for that, I was grateful. I had no more words left for her. The nights felt endless, haunted by the memory of her tear-streaked face, and that stool in my mind, the way she looked naked, unashamed, in Michael's arms. The dog, Carson, was with me now. She had left him at my friend's place, and I took him in. He'd wag his tail for me. But when Emily's name came up, I could see a faint confusion in his eyes. Dogs understand more than we give them credit for. Yet the city kept spinning. People moved on with their lives. I discovered it was easier to slip into anonymity, to keep my interactions functional and minimal. Work consumed me. I let it. There was a gratification in throwing myself into spreadsheets, campaigns, deadlines. It filled the empty hours and kept me from drowning in memories. Sometimes, though, at night, I hear music playing from a passing car or from some far-off open window. I'd recall that line. She doesn't go to parties anymore because I'm there. In the song titles, in the chatter of friends, in her sleep. But for me, the heartbreak was that I couldn't fully escape her either. She lingered in my mind, in every quiet moment that reminded me how trust had been my weapon, turned against me. And I suspected it was now a blade that haunted her dreams. Weeks bowled into months. I didn't track the time too precisely. I just knew that with each sunrise, the ache became a little duller, a little easier to bear. Meanwhile, Word reached me through mutual acquaintances that Emily had almost disappeared from the social scene. Michael was rumored to be focusing on his bar or traveling out of town. She stayed home more often, presumably preparing for the baby. Sometimes, the cynical side of me wondered if he'd stay with her once the child was born, or if she'd be left alone entirely. Either scenario twisted my insides in a way I couldn't quite define. But she was no longer my responsibility. One crisp morning, I was jogging along the waterfront with Carson. The cold wind off the water stung my cheeks, but I welcomed it, letting the physical sensation keep me present. A barge's deep horn sounded somewhere on the bay. Carson tugged at the leash, eager to chase a gull. That's when I saw her. She sat on a bench, arms folded over her belly. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she stared across the gray water with a distant expression. I hesitated, thinking I could turn around and run the other way without her noticing. But something in her posture stopped me. There was a loneliness to it that wasn't about us. It was about her entire world. Maybe the pregnancy was near its term. Her belly looked prominent. She wore a heavy coat, but it didn't hide much. Carson whimpered softly, as if he recognized her. She turned, eyes lingering on him first, then lifting to meet mine. A wave of tension passed through me. For a second, I considered bolting, but we just stared at each other. The city's noise, subdued by distance, the hush between us roaring with unspoken words. She tried a small smile, one that trembled on her lips. "Hi," she managed. I cleared my throat. "Hi." Carson wagged his tail uncertainly. She extended a hand as if to pat him, but hesitated. "May I?" she asked softly. My gut clenched, but I nodded. Carson patted forward, sniffing her outstretched fingers. He let her scratch behind his ears, though not as enthusiastically as he once did. I realized I was holding my breath, as if waiting for a blow. Instead, she just stroked the dog in silence. Then she looked up at me with sad eyes. "Are you well?" she asked, her voice cautious. "As well as I can be," I replied. The wind gusted, and I shifted on my feet. "You?" She gave a half-chuckle, half-sigh. "I've been better." We fell silent again. In that quiet, I felt the old pain stirring, but it was gentler now, like an old bruise you can press without flinching. She placed a hand on her belly, as if to steady herself. I wondered if the baby was kicking. I couldn't bring myself to ask. Before either of us could speak, Carson pulled at the leash. Maybe he sensed my discomfort, or maybe he just caught sight of another gull. I decided it was time to go. "Take care of yourself," I said, my voice neutral. "You too," she whispered. I turned and jogged away, not daring to look back. By the time I reached my little apartment, the crisp morning air had scored some of the emotional residue off me. I collapsed onto my couch, dog panting by my side, and realized my hands were trembling. Seeing her had rattled something deep within me. But I also knew I wasn't the same man who walked out barefoot that night. The pain had changed me. I don't know exactly how much time passed before she gave birth. I heard through the grapevine that she had a boy, healthy. For a moment, the news tightened my chest with an emotion I couldn't name. Regret, relief, sadness, bitterness, maybe all of them. But I let it wash over me and fade. That child wasn't mine, though I'd once believed I would be a father. The realization tasted like old metal in my mouth. Michael, from what I heard, still ran his bar. He was rumored to be in and out of Emily's life. Not quite dependable, but not completely gone. Part of me felt pity for her. A deeper part of me recognized it was no longer my concern. Healing, I found, involves letting go of the illusions and the heartbreak, piece by piece, no matter how deep they're lodged. Sometimes, on restless nights, I recall that final note I left. "I'm not punishing you. I'm healing from you." The words ring in my mind. They remind me that love can wound deeper than any sword, and trust can be sharper than any blade. She might go to parties again someday, but I'll be there in the stories mutual friends tell, in the songs they play, in the corners of her memories. She might see a stool in a bar, or a certain wooden chair in someone's home, and remember the moment I walked in, silent, and saw her as a stranger. And I think that's the real consequence. She cannot escape what she did, not because I force it upon her, but because betrayal imprints itself on the soul. Indifference is the worst part. Not the physical betrayal, not even the tearful apologies, but the gap that forms when you realize someone simply didn't value your trust enough to guard it carefully. That gap can never fully close. Even if you forgive, the shape of it remains, a hollow place in your spirit. You might fill it with new people, new routines, new experiences, but the outline remains, a reminder that once, trust was turned into a weapon, and it left a permanent scar. I haven't gone back to her. I won't. My life goes on. People ask if I started dating again, if I found someone who can mend my heart. Maybe someday. But for now, I find a certain peace in my solitude. In the hush of my small apartment, I can hear my own thoughts, slow and sure. The dog sleeps by my feet. Sometimes I cook a simple meal for myself. I set the table with care. I eat slowly, tasting every bite, remembering that my senses belong to me alone. Nobody shares that space anymore. It's a mix of freedom and loneliness, but it's mine, earned with pain and silence. And if there's one lesson I carry with me, one truth I hold close, it's that the most agonizing part of betrayal isn't the image of your wife, naked on a stool with another man. It isn't even the shock of discovering a child isn't yours. It's the slow, dawning realization that they treated your trust as disposable. That's what carves a hollow place in your heart. The physical details fade, the arguments grow hazy, but the knowledge of their indifference lingers like a bruise on the soul. Yet, in a strange way, that bruise becomes a reminder of your capacity to feel, to hope, to trust. Maybe one day, I'll learn to extend that trust again, carefully this time, mindful of how sharp it can be. Because if trust is a weapon, it can be used for protection as much as harm. But that's a distant thought, something for a future version of me to explore. Right now, I'm content to exist in the aftermath, to let time settle the dust of what was once my life with her. I do know this. She doesn't go to those loud parties anymore. She can't hide from me in the rhythms of dance floors or in the chatter of mutual friends. She might see me in every mention of my name, in the jokes told over a round of drinks, in the haunting space of her dreams. That's not because I seek revenge or want her to suffer. It's simply because I'm there, etched into her story, the way scars remain after a deep cut. And that is, perhaps, more profound than any vengeance I could plan. My revenge, if it can even be called that, was to walk away. Barefoot, feeling each step of cold tile and rough concrete, so I would never forget the moment I decided my self-respect mattered more than her empty apologies. No sound was louder than my silence that night, and no shout could have struck her with the force of my steady gaze as I left. That's something no one can erase, not her tears, not his apologies, not the passage of time. Yes, I still think about the chair where she sat, naked, fused with another man's body. I still sometimes hear the city's noise clashing with the stillness in my heart. But I've learned to live alongside those memories. They don't define me. They're just chapters in a story that continues. I have found that each day, though weighed down by a certain heaviness, also holds the possibility of new beginnings, small and unassuming. A jog with my dog, a conversation with a friend, a moment of honest reflection without bitterness corroding my insides. And every night, before I fall asleep, I remind myself of the note I wrote. I am not punishing you. I am healing from you. In healing, I've discovered there's a strength that surpasses anger or fear. Anger burns quickly and leaves ashes. Fear corrodes. But healing, though slow, is enduring. It's the kind of power that allows you to look betrayal in the face and say, "You didn't destroy me. I'm still here, and I can still feel." That's what it means to be a man who refuses to let betrayal become his defining moment. I am more than that night, and I will keep reminding myself of it, one quiet step at a time.